Those who have been to a ruined wedding, what happened? When I was 6 or 7, I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me. So much sugar everywhere. Basically heaven. The reception was in a big community centre that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom, passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, uncle had a stroke and had died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying and everyone except close family left. Bright side is, the marriage is still going strong 20 years later, despite what happened that day. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he'd be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end, he was too unwell to attend, despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the wedding reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. I honestly couldn't imagine anything worse than this happening. Like it's supposed to be the best day of your entire life, and you've just received the news that your father had passed away. Just imagine. I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilt on wedding dresses, the lot. The one I'll never forget. An all-day do, small ceremony, a few close friends and family, and a big reception filled with a huge buffet, every type of food you could imagine, and a free bar, all in the same venue. They'd booked and paid for 250 evening guests, but 30 guests turned up, at most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive, beautiful, converted barn, loads of food and drinks, great music, but no guests. At about 10 p.m, the venue is licensed until 11. The buffet food had barely been touched. The few who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent as it was planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the new people could take it home, and her response of, "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming," was the most awkward I've ever felt in my life. No more guests showed. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance about 10:30 p.m, and the bride beamed when she thought it was latecomers arriving. But no, it was just taxis arriving to pick up the few who were there. It's the only event I've ever done where we didn't have to kick people out of the venue. At 11 p.m, the place was empty. In a nutshell, bride's parents paid for the day and the happy couple had zero control over their guest list. Her parents invited all of their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates they wanted to flex on, resulting in no one giving an ish about an invite to a wedding where they didn't even know the bride or groom. It was basically just a networking event for the bride's parents. I used to do catering work, and this one time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods on a beautiful river. I found out while we were loading the truck that the boss wouldn't be going and that I was essentially in charge. My boss promised that everything was taken care of, set up, etc. So, you can imagine my surprise when I arrived to this remote location and literally nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords to run the coffee and tea. There were none. We needed tables to set up the food. There were none. I somehow whipped up impromptu everything for the missing things. And just as the bride and groom are arriving, we blow the fuse for our only power source and the place is plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker, I move some stuff around, blow the fuse again. This delicate dance went on for the entire evening, through speeches, first dance, the works. I think the worst part of the entire experience was when we went to rinse our dishes before boxing them up and found out that when we blew the fuses, the water pump for the place stopped working and needed to be primed again. At that point I said, "Forget about it, we'll take them back dirty," and the crew and I spent several more hours after the long ride home doing them. That was the day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break, and still ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. The mother of the groom was an alcoholic for many years. She decided to quit drinking cold turkey a few days before his wedding. During the reception, she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital via ambulance. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge/waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everybody was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honour literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500 plus feet. I honestly cannot believe some of the tragedies that have happened at these weddings. Like, it wouldn't even be remembered for your wedding day anymore. It would literally be remembered for the day that the maid of honour fell off a 500-foot cliff to her death whilst posing for a photo. Like, how unlucky do you have to be? I was a guest of friend of the bride. Didn't know anyone attending. Very expensive, over the top kind of place. Several hundred guests of this very Italian wedding. Maid of honour grabs mic at the cocktail bar and begins her speech, rambling, drunk. Quickly devolves to stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against the wedding and that's basically what killed her. Plus, Vinny will never give up prostitutes. She's tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. No one turned up to the reception except myself and my partner. There was about 8 people in total and the couple had gone all out for the reception. Awkward. Father of the bride died suddenly 3 days before the wedding, pre-COVID. Daddy-daughter dance was mum, bride and picture of dad. Same with walking down the aisle to give her away. Lots of tears and not many smiles. Even the bartender at the hotel knew the night before and was talking about it with me. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom brought the wedding package on Groupon. Which is fine, why spend a fortune for one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners. So they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat urine some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off, the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. It was a big wedding, over 300 people. Turns out, the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was, his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and his restaurant. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting for him, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid AF. The place was overcrowded. You could barely move without bumping into someone else, and in the heat that was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something, because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti and rolls. Not enough to feed even the guests. Most people left after the first dance. 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. Honestly, that would be my dad at my wedding. He's late for absolutely everything. Do you know, he was actually late for my birth? Like, he arrived and I was already out. So he didn't actually see me be born, which is brilliant. I don't know if that's just like a dad thing though. Best friend's mum got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding. But for some reason, didn't hire a DJ. Last minute, her mum asked me to manage the CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each. I tried to warn her that I simply did not follow, but she told me she had confidence in me. Apparently, all her life she wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song, but I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset, so she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror/amusement of the crowd. For years after, when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, he'd say, "Is this the guy who effed up my wedding? How are ya?" Oh, come on. I wouldn't say he ruined the wedding. Like, he did tell the bride that he wasn't understanding the task, so it's not really his fault. And that's a lot of pressure to put on someone. I bet he still feels guilty for technically ruining the wedding day. Yeah, I feel bad for the guy. Attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone. And much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great. He did 2 copies, one edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is the stuff of legends. Drunk mother of the bride stumbled, fell, and rolled into a lake. You honestly couldn't write that, could you? You couldn't write it. Do you know what I mean? As if stumbling isn't embarrassing enough, let alone actually falling onto the floor, then followed by your whole body rolling into a lake in front of an entire crowd of wedding goers. Oh, you poor little lady. Maybe not ruined, but it definitely got tense. Started with the best man/groom's brother just absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. Basically called them gold diggers and stuff in front of several hundred family and friends. Then they cut the cake. Apparently, the groom was told under no uncertain terms not to shove cake in her face. Well, he did it anyway, and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. Reception went on as planned. She got wasted, and I'm told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. Pure class. They're divorced now. If my husband shoved cake in my face on our wedding day, I would file for a divorce then and there in that same second. Do you have any idea how much she would have spent on that makeup? Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't know how much she actually spent on it myself. She could have got it done for free, but the point is, these things take a lot of time. This is one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, the photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaid, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee, etc., but she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced, etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. I was studying photography and used to act as an assistant to a well-known wedding photographer. Went to a couple's wedding. He shot digital and I shot black and white film. Spent all day with the couple from 9 a.m. through till 2 a.m. the next morning when we left. I could see how genuinely in love they were. It was only a day, but I got to know them quite well and really liked them both. The next morning, I get a call from the photographer and his voice was shaky. He explained that the groom had been murdered that night after the reception party. 3 guys had broken into their bungalow to steal wedding gifts. The groom got out of bed to stop them and they executed him in front of the bride. I was in shock for about 2 weeks. This story was in South Africa, if that helps explain how or why this happened. The next weekend, the photographer and I went to the bride's house to present her with the photos. We'd worked together to get the job massively accelerated so she had the photos of her husband. We did it at our own expense and didn't charge her a penny for the day or all the prints and albums. Sort of the least we could do. Because my photos didn't matter as much, I'd been able to simply capture those natural moments between them, rather than stage wedding photos, so they had the normal album pics, but also about 150 snaps of just them being a couple. She was in tears from the moment we arrived till we left a few hours later. She was a shadow of the woman I'd met only a week earlier. That ish still haunts me. I'm literally speechless. How does that happen? That poor woman. My heart literally goes out to you. Aussie bride married into Russian family. There were vodka bottles on every table. The bride tried to keep up with the vodka shots. I was impressed at her effort. Then she disappeared for a couple of hours and didn't move much for the rest of the night. I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They'd been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd, I knew something was wrong. Friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she's overwhelmed. Immediately call friend and ask what's going on and if this was okay. Turns out, friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, him and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologising to all those his wife and him invited and telling them to leave without telling his parents. Parents had a meltdown as we left. That would get me angry too. Why do parents do that? Why do they try and take control of their daughter or son's day like it's their day? Let them organise it how they want to. A fight broke out between the father of the bride, brother of the bride, and some guy that just happened to be staying at the hotel. In reality, I don't know how much of a fight it was. More just the dad and brother assaulting some man. So anyway, they were both arrested. Cut to the bride sobbing at breakfast because her dad and brother spent the evening of her wedding in jail and now face assault charges for what they did to this poor man. Do you know what the fight was about? No clue. Nothing of substance, I imagine, since they didn't know this person. It was 4 years back now, but I think it was something along the lines of, "Did you just frickin' bump into me?" type ish that escalated. I bet that fight started because they all had too much to drink, thought they were big boys and tried to start a fight. Absolute classic. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding, the The bride went swimming in the ocean. It took place in Tenerife. She swam out too far and was basically lost at sea for 9 hours or so. She eventually found her way back, but was in bad shape. Everyone was panicked the whole day and thought she drowned. By the time she got back, she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read a bunch of messages supposedly from her aunt. But it was quickly clear from the sexy content it wasn't her aunt at all. She'd been having an affair with the best man for apparently years. They got an annulment shortly after, 60,000 down the drain. One of the most opulent weddings I've ever been to. The groom's father groped both the bride and his daughter, and my then girlfriend, multiple times each. Ended up getting punched out by his son and locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. Ew, what a weirdo. You should have kept him in the minivan to rot. Hurricane Ivan. Our wedding was scheduled for Friday, and the hurricane hit us dead centre on Thursday. We were sitting around with no power on Friday, and remembered that a neighbour was a pastor. So my partner and I just knocked on his front door and asked if he would just marry us in the front yard. So the big church wedding was cancelled, but instead I got married in the front yard with chainsaws and stuff in the background. Been married 17 years now. I absolutely love that. Things like that excite me, like spontaneous moments in your life. And do you know what? I bet it was still the best day of your life, no matter where you were. We attended a wedding for a family member who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue, but was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and asked if we had any friends, but we lived in the city an hour away. They had all this food for 100 people, but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. I used to work at a pretty upscale catering hall in New Jersey back in college, and we had 2 instances where I witnessed a ruined wedding. The first story's simple. Bride and best man caught out in the car. But the second story... We all thought it was weird when a couple of the groomsmen asked for, and got access to, the reception room during cocktail hour. For decorating. Not something we normally saw the men do. In any case, we get through the courses just fine. And one thing becomes very clear to us staff. The bride's side of the family is very conservative. They didn't drink, they barely danced, and they watched wide-eyed as the groom's side of the party went wild. Now it's time for the speeches. About halfway through his speech, the best man says something along the lines of, "Hey, bride's family, I know you think your girl's so sweet and innocent and Christian, and they are the perfect couple, but if you want to see what they're really like, look under your seat." Well, taped under every chair was a picture of the bride and groom caught in the act. The groom's family and friends roared with laughter, but the bride's side was peed. There were so many fights that broke out that night. Did I mention this was in New Jersey? The wedding was pretty much over at that point. Bride has given explicit wedding instructions before through various channels. One rule being that there is to be no posts on social media before bride gives the instructions that it is okay, and certainly no posts before her. Anyway, a few hours before, someone posts something saying that they are at a wedding, whatever. Absolutely nothing malicious, just generic statement. Anyway, bride sees this. Vows go ahead in front of the congregation. At the end of the vows, bride turns to the congregation and says, "Please can you all unfriend or delete on socials, name, as I gave out explicit instructions that there are to be no socials until I give the okay, and, name, has broken that rule today." Happiest day of your life, and then imagine that. Literally just finished vows and new husband. Everyone awkwardly laughed as if she was joking. Nope. She then storms off, her new husband awkwardly following on behind. There was a weird atmosphere after that, and everyone made excuses. I'm talking proper fake emergency stuff here. I have to get back because I need to, yeah, bye. And left much earlier than usual. No one wanted to be there and having to have awkward conversations with the bride, so most of them had left before they even saw her. There was no party atmosphere anymore. Not as dramatic as some of the comments on here, but very awkward. Was it a lovely wedding, really romantic, all candlelit, and the reception was lovely. The best man made a good speech. Then at the end, he said everybody raise your glasses to... He said the groom's name, and then accidentally called the new bride the ex's wife's name of the groom. Oh, you idiot. Just imagine how bad that would be. You would want the floor to literally swallow your entire existence up. That is mental. Went to a co-worker's wedding about 15 years ago, and this technically happened at the reception. It was a beautiful outdoor venue overlooking a lake. Anyways, the groom had planned to sing a song to his new wife and have fireworks launch as he was singing the last note. Well, that last note came, but the fireworks did not. He held that last note for a good 10 seconds before he finally yelled, "Mother duckers!" threw the mic down and ran to go fight the fireworks guy. No fists were thrown, but somebody did end up in the lake. The party kinda broke up after that. They also ended up getting a divorce about a year later after the groom got fired from his job for showing his D to his boss's underage daughter. Scumbag, 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 scumbag. My own. It rained and was cold. No one bothered to turn the lights on, so the few pictures I have are dark and grainy. My parents divorced earlier that year, so my dad hated seeing mum for the first time and didn't stick around to get a picture with me. My husband's mum didn't even take off work to attend. Apparently the money was more important. Good news is that we just celebrated our 49th wedding anniversary. Rain on your wedding day is supposed to be good luck. A wet knot is stronger than a dry one. This didn't ruin the whole wedding, but it surely didn't brighten my day. After the ceremony, we were standing in front of the altar and people took turns to congratulate us. As it was my mother's turn, she took my hand and told me she's sorry she raised such a bad person like me. Thank God my husband doesn't speak her language well. Geez, that one cuts deep. A friend of my girlfriend was getting married. The wedding was quite normal. They got married in the local church and then there was the party in a nice restaurant. The photographer asked the bride and her bridesmaids, my girlfriend being one of them, to go outside for some photos. Some minutes later, one of the bridesmaids come back asking for help. There were some swans that attacked the photographer and the majority of the people around him weren't doing anything much more than laughing at this guy who was running around and screaming. No luck catching the swans then. It was just the one swan, actually. The poor bride started her menstrual cycle on her big day, and she was nauseated and in pain all day. She couldn't eat any of the buffet because her stomach hurt too much, and anything she tried to eat ended up being vomited back up. She couldn't even stand properly either because of her cramps. She stayed seated. In most of the wedding photos, she's grimacing instead of smiling because she was so ill. Was invited to a wedding of a friend's friend because she didn't have enough own people to get the reception as big as she wanted it to be. Also, the bride and groom were super young, got pregnant 3 months after hooking up and marrying for all the wrong reasons. Party starts. Whole atmosphere is forced and strained. Everybody knows the whole thing is fake in a way, so I decide to spend my time outside with the smokers. Having a wonderful time until we can hear screaming inside and the bride runs past us very Hollywood style, all teary and dramatic. Turns out the ice cake wasn't stored properly, was slightly defrosting and a little lopsided. Bride didn't come back. Cake was really nice. Couple got divorced 9 months later. Oh, come on, girl, that's not a reason to run out, is it? Just because of the cake. I mean, I understand it would be stressful and disappointing, but you can't just leave the wedding entirely for the cake. Come on. A couple of years back, I was waitressing at this function lounge that was hosting the reception. The music starts, but nobody comes in for a solid 30 seconds, so the DJ cuts the music. Everyone hears loud arguing in the foyer for about a minute, when 2 men come stumbling into the hall, absolutely fighting each other bloody. It was the groom and the bride's brother. Turns out the groom's side of the family didn't want him marrying the girl, and the groom decided at the reception that he agreed with his family. Long story short, more people got involved with the fighting, police got called. Bride was understandably a crying mess, but she decided that if she spent so much money on the event, then they were going to have a party with or without the groom. Honestly, she was so much stronger than I could have ever been, so good on her for that, but the whole thing was an absolute mess. $28,000 wedding paid for by the father of the bride. Groom gets alcohol poisoning and goes to the hospital 30 minutes before. Not a happy pupper. But there was plenty of extra $600 cake. My dad has vintage and veteran cars. When I was younger, he used to do some weddings with them. I loved clearing out the confetti from the car when he'd get home. One week, he arrived back and there was no confetti in the car. On the way to the church, the bride changed her mind, and instead of taking her and her father to church, they asked if he could drop them at the local zoo as it's her favourite place. So he did. Left them there in full wedding attire. They were going to get a taxi home when they were done. Not me, but a close friend, who's a wedding photographer. Waiting at the altar, the best man announced that the groom was coming out as gay and the wedding was cancelled. Everyone laughed like it was a best man joke, but no, it was very serious. Bride was on the way in the car. She was not happy. All the guests had to wait while they sorted their lives out. In the end, they split the reception room in two and each family had their own dinners. Needless to say, they didn't want the photos. As if they split the room and had their own separate dinners on each side. I understand these weddings cost incredible amounts of money, but imagine the atmosphere. That would have been so awkward. I'm a wedding photographer. I was at one really fancy one a couple of years ago. Typical outdoor deal at a swanky location in the middle of nowhere. The place was really nice. Had a large concrete stairway flanked by water fountains that led down to the altar area, so the bride could be seen by all like she was ascending from heaven. The ceremony begins and the bridal party come down and take their places. Then the bride appears with her father. She takes 3 or 4 steps down the concrete steps and her shoe twists on her. She tumbled down a good 12 feet or more and busted out the majority of her front teeth in the fall. So much blood all over her. With the place being so isolated, it took a good 40 minutes for the ambulance to arrive and she was in intense pain. Ultimately, she was okay and I got an email from them weeks later with the rescheduled date. This time, there was no stairs anywhere in sight. The groom caught the bride in the toilets with another guy at the reception. He forgave her, but after 2 months or so, he caught her again with another guy. A third one. Blimey. That's a bit greedy, isn't it? When I was maybe 4 or 5, I walked in on my uncle's wife-to-be and her maid of honour kissing the night before the ceremony. Little kid me must have casually dropped this into conversation with my dad. It all unravelled from there. I wish I remembered more, as frankly it is some top-tier family drama, and my uncle has always been an asshole. I remember them jumping apart and her crouching to my level to say, "Hi, name. What are you doing here? I'm going to be your auntie." During the mixed-gender bachelor party, the bride-to-be got in a spat with the groom and slept with another guy. Wedding was off the next morning. They lost 10k plus. He took her back a couple of months later. A co-worker was at one of his best friend's weddings. There were very specific rules about the food. No nuts. There were a couple people there, including the maid of honour, who was severely allergic. The venue served something that had nuts. Maid of honour went anaphylactic. EpiPen was not effective, and she died on the way to the hospital. Needless to say, there are lawsuits abound. That is awful. She actually died. On the way to the hospital. Just imagine what the chef feels like. Just imagine. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos coming daily.